on this. So what I would like to discuss is how much fraud there really is in science and how much of a reproducibility crisis there is. And my thesis is, and we can discuss this hopefully at length afterwards, that current scientific practice faces structural problems that we need to address urgently. But that I don't believe that there is a major issue with reproducibility or fraud, that this is often a misunderstanding of the scientific process. So let me start with the beginning, the contention that there is little evidence of true fraud. And this is particularly personal because maybe some of you have read this article in Science a year ago, where it was pointed out that many papers that we have published over the years were subject of investigations. Specifically, Dr. Elizabeth Big flagged more than 30 of our papers. And so what is happening here is that there's a group of people with best intentions who are following our work intensely, scrutinizing images that were published, thousands, tens of thousands of images over the decades, and identify mistakes using AI-powered software that we overlooked. And there were quite a few mistakes committed by many trainees, postdocs, who were obviously very disconcerted by this discovery. In addition, the peer pursuit, guided by these people of our lab, has identified multiple errors in the labs of many collaborators who became more or less collateral damage of the pursuit of our lab. And so the question then is this particular instance, as an example, an evidence of widespread falsification, fraud, irreproducibility, or are we looking at things here that are errors, or maybe even artifacts, or simply non-existent, and that we have to deal with because now we are in a new stage in science where AI-powered image analysis can identify absolutely anything and actually also make up anything. So as an example, for example, this accusation here of fraud against my lab was that in this plot that we published many years ago, there appear to be in the background duplications of little pieces. They don't correspond to lanes, they don't cover up anything, they're just there. I have no explanations of what happened. But I suspect that these are, as observed in other images, low-resolution images of high-resolution pictures that were during reproduction created by the software. I don't know that for sure. It seems absurd for me, however, to think that somebody would actually put these random things in there. Another accusation, for example, is that I am inappropriately co-authoring papers, as shown here, because I'm a middle author and I seem to be the only author of this paper from my lab, until it turns out that the senior author was actually a postdoc in my lab who did most of the work in my lab. So this is kind of disturbing, but the fact is that many mistakes were uncovered that we actually did commit. Major mistakes, maybe not. What you see here, for example, is a typical recent example, where you have two pictures, one is wrong and one is right. We couldn't see the difference, but it turns out that the correct image on the right was missed, and instead the wrong image was pasted into it, and as a result, in this particular paper, which contains hundreds of images, that one error was not detected until AI could actually find it. Here's another example. There's actually one control image which was copy-pasted twice. So the question then arises, how do such errors, which obviously shouldn't have happened, but do happen, how do they occur? Well, I don't know for some of these errors how they occurred. This is another example that is particularly pertinent here, because You don't see this until you isolate the blue channel, and you can see in the blue channel that there are segmental duplications, very similar actually to the plot that I showed you earlier. I have no explanation for this. It served no purpose since the blue channel wasn't even mentioned, let alone analyzed in this paper. It was sort of a background channel. But the journals, in particular, Neuron, is very, very sensitive to these kinds of accusations, and they forced us to retract the paper because of this phenomenon, which I don't understand. And so the question arises, what is the origin of these mistakes? How could it happen that so many things happened in papers, and not only ours, but also our collaborators, and I guess it will probably occur for many other labs as well. And when we plotted the timeline of errors in our papers and compared them to the scientific procedures, what you can see here is that over the years after I started my lab, there's basically been a steady number of publications emerging that slightly decline over time. Okay? But the actual errors only start when we started to digital process imaging. Before that, there were no errors. Okay? So the minute we started, or the time we started to digitally process images, we made mistakes. And we did make mistakes. There's no question about it. And we believe that these are partly artifacts of digital image processing, partly copy-paste errors. And we believe that they're likely to occur in many other papers as well, not only from our labs, as evidenced by the fact that so many of our collaborators were also implicated. So I don't think that this is a reproducible crisis. I don't think that this is fraud. But it is certainly something that we need to deal with. The question obviously arises, why are these now being so severely criticized in our current life? And so I think that one thing is obviously that this is a way of, it's a profession in some way. The positives is that these errors shouldn't occur and we should need to correct them, at least some of them. It's sometimes difficult when you have copy-paste errors in papers that are 10, 20 years old. On the other hand, philosophically, nobody would ever see these errors because you don't see them if you don't have software to actually analyze. So does it matter? If a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? I'm sure you've heard about that saying. Moreover, I think that the cost to especially junior scientists has been enormous. And this is something that shouldn't be neglected. On the other hand, it's well recognized by the science integrity community that this is a good thing that's happening. And in fact, Dr. Bick got a prize for this, which awarded her with money, and she donated some of this money to Stanford, and Stanford appointed her as a faculty affiliate afterwards. So she's now my colleague. That's how it goes. So I use this as a lengthy example. Let me now move on to tell you some more things that are issues here.